Welcome to the Gilshrat channel. Today I'm going to go over how to install a decoder into this locomotive here. This is a D51 and this came with the Kato starter set that I purchased. You can see that one in my earlier videos. So today I'm going to go ahead and install a decoder into this locomotive. My current plan is to install this decoder into the locomotive. This is the DZ126T, and it's designed to be the smallest decoder that Digitrax currently makes. And I believe I can install this decoder inside this locomotive without having to do any drilling or having to cut out any parts of the weights, because that's very common with N scale locomotives. There's a couple things also that make this a good first installation. First of all, this is an inexpensive locomotive. As you may have seen in some of my other clips, it doesn't run the greatest, so if I accidentally damage this locomotive, I'm not going to be, heartbroken or anything. But if it does work, then it'll be a good practice for updating the other decoders, and probably the Tomix locomotive. That will be the locomotive that I think will be a bit of a challenge. So it's actually fairly simple. The first thing is I'm going to disconnect the tender from the rest of the locomotive. So to do that, it's actually very easy. This little screw, there's a little screw right here that holds this little plate that holds the wheel set in place. And there's two screws, one here and one here. And I'm going to just loosen up the back one. And it's actually a very short screw, so it probably will pop out. But I'm not going to unscrew the front one because I don't want this panel to come out. I want these wheels to stay here. But by doing that, I've loosened up the back part, and there's a little plastic tab that pulls down, and you can see right there, and that's what holds this into place. So I pop that off, and now the tender's disconnected. And you'll notice that there's these two metal little strips here. These actually bring power from the rear trucks to the frame, and you see these little knobs here, and the frame is actually split, so it is using the frame as a way to bring power to the motor. So this is important because in order to install a decoder, basically the biggest thing that you have to do is isolate the motor from the frame or wherever it's getting the power from, so you can put the decoder in between the track power pickups and the motor. And that's also another thing that makes this locomotive a good first start, is it does not have a light. It just has this little reflective thing, so like I said, it's a very inexpensive locomotive. So I don't even have to worry about installing any lights or anything into this, or connecting the light wires, which will be a little bit more of a challenge when I try to update that Tomix, or install a decoder in that Tomix, because that does actually have a light in both the tender and the locomotive, and it's directional, and you have to watch out for voltage with the little LEDs, so you have to be very careful with that. So we've got this disconnected. The next part here is I'm going to pop the coal load out, and this is where I'm going to actually install the decoder. So to do this, you also have to unscrew. There's a little screw right here, and this actually screws up into the weight, and that's what holds that part together. So I'll take that screw, and let's see here. Okay, so carefully take that screw out, make sure you put it someplace that you will not lose it, and then you'll see that this top part will slide out. So let me do that. And that pops out. And you can see the construction of the locomotive here, the tender here. We have these two copper strips, and these copper strips connect to these little metal plates that touch the wheels and bring power from the wheels up into these copper strips, and these copper strips are then connected to the little copper wires, I guess, little tabs there that bring power to the locomotive shell. So everything is actually connected, which is really good because my plan is to solder the wires from the decoder, the track pickups, onto these little copper tabs. And then that way I'm getting track power from all the pickup wheels to this. So that is one nice thing about the design of this locomotive. Now, to get this decoder in here, you'll notice that there is a weight, but I have realized that there is a way to get the decoder up inside behind this weight. So the weight only kind of goes up to about here, and there's actually a little bit of a cavity here where the coal load's at, and this little decoder, which I actually have one I pulled out of the packaging, this little decoder will fit inside of this area. So we'll do that. And I've also been able to verify that, and this might not come out very well on my camera because it doesn't do well with small things, but there's a little notch right here, and that notch goes all the way up through the top, and it's just big enough that I can run the, I believe it's the orange and the gray wire. I'll double check the wiring diagram here, but the orange and the gray wire will actually fit through this little notch, and these are the wires that will run up to the motor, and this is where the motor power comes from. And then the black and the red are the wires that you use to pick up power from the track. So these are all the wires for the lighting. So the blue and yellow wire, I believe the white wire, actually I should double check the wiring diagram. I will in a little bit, and I'll verify all these wire colors. But these wires I will not need. So once I've double checked and verified that this decoder works, I'm probably just going to snip these wires off because I don't need them and they're going to get in the way of the installation. So that's how that works. To get the weight out, I found that you just put a little screwdriver up in here, a flathead, and it just pops out. Now, I am being a little rough with this. The reason why is this part of the shell is hidden inside of here. So if it gets a little damaged, I'm not really worried about that. But if this was a better quality locomotive, or this was a part that would actually stick out, you would want to be very, very gentle with this part because you do not want to damage anything that's going to be aesthetic. So that popped out. So yeah, you can see the cavity there, and you can kind of see the little flat notch here, which is where I'm going to run the wires. And then this back part here, I will run the track power pickups from here, and those will come out the back, and then I'll solder them back here. And then there's this little hole in the center, but you actually have to leave this open because there's this little centering plastic tab here that holds these copper pieces in place and also keeps the weight centered. So that I have to keep together. So that is how we dismantle that part. The next thing I need to do is dismantle the locomotive. And this is also, I found, very, very easy. So I found with this, I do have to pop off the front lead trucks to get to a screw underneath it. So just like I did before, I'll unscrew the front screw this time. I reattached the back screw because once again we don't want this panel falling off because then the wheels will fall out, and that's a pain, especially with steam locomotives because you have to get everything lined back up so the drawbars and everything fit. But you just loosen that up. There's also another plastic tab that holds this in place, and we'll set that there. And then I'm going to put that screw back in because it doesn't need to be kept out, and I don't want to lose it. I have found a very common practice, especially with these small screws that screw into plastic, is go backwards about a turn or so until you hear a little click, or you feel the screw threads line up, and then you can screw in. And that helps ensure that you don't accidentally misalign the threads and strip out your screw or the screw hole. And the next thing is I'm going to loosen, but not detach, basically the cylinders here. So this is just a plastic piece that goes underneath and is screwed into the frame here. And this holds the drawbars and stuff. You don't want to pull this out because then it makes it a really big pain in the butt. because you then have to put the drawbars and everything back in there and line them back up. And I had to do some repair work to my little K4 locomotive because it was seizing up for some weird reason when I went backwards. And I ended up pulling that part out, and it was, I mean, I got it back together, but it was not fun. So you just need to loosen it a little. And the reason you have to loosen it is just to make it so that the frame can pop out, because this, otherwise if this is tight, it kind of holds the front end of the frame. So this body, I'm sorry, not frame, but the body shell, this body shell literally just snaps into place. So this probably won't show up very well on camera just because of how this camera's not good at small parts. But if you look carefully underneath the firebox, you'll see these little holes, and how it works is there's like a little piece of metal that sticks out on the frame, and there's these little holes, there's one on each side, and that actually is what holds the shell onto the frame on the back, and then the front part just slides over the shell. So you'll see. So to get this open, you just have to very gently, and this, because it's cosmetic, I will be very gentle, you have to just gently pop that. I'll do the other side as well. And it should, once I get it loosened up a little bit, sometimes you have to put a screwdriver on both sides and do it at the same time. And I have scratched the frame a little bit. You can use toothpicks, that's better, especially if you're dealing with metal parts. If the inside of the frame gets scratched a little bit, like I said, this is an inexpensive locomotive, so I'm not that worried. So that side's loose. And this side is now loose. There we go. Okay, so now this pops out. So you can see that has popped out. You see it have scratched the frame a little bit, but that's all underneath. It's all going to be held up. And then pull that forward, and you can see that this part of the frame here is what... Let's not get that way. This part of the frame here is what was holding the front of the shell. There's a little cavity. So the shell just pops off. Really, like I said, there is no light or anything in here. So when I initially was looking at this, I thought, well, it'd be easier if I just put the decoder in the front. And it would fit up in here, but I would have to basically cut out part of this weight, and I did not want to have to do that. So that's why I'm going to install it in the tender. It's very common to put decoders in the tender. Plus, in the future, I doubt I'm going to put sound in this, but if I did, there's enough room in here that if I were to take this weight out or adjust things, I could actually put a sound decoder in the tender. And so now, I'm going to take the weight off. So you can see this locomotive is very easy to dismantle. Next, I'm going to take the motor off. Now, I'm going to do this for a couple reasons. One, I want to do a stall test to verify that this decoder will indeed work in this locomotive. This decoder is rated at 1.25 amps, I believe. It's a 1 amp decoder with a 1.25 amp peak. So, I'll explain that a little bit, but when you have a decoder, the peak is basically what we call the stall. So if your locomotive is running and it gets stuck and the motor stops spinning, the motor will actually suck a lot of energy when it's stuck because it's trying to move and it's pulling as much amperage as it can. If you pull too much amperage during that, you can burn out your decoder. So if you've been a fan of my channel for years, way back, I honestly don't remember how many years ago, I installed a decoder into a brass locomotive. It was actually also a D51, but it was HO. And in that one, I had an old frame motor, an open frame motor, and those things are very inefficient. They draw a lot of power. And that thing, I believe, had a 2.5 amp peak. So I had to make sure I had a decoder that could handle that. So before I install this decoder, I do want to do a stall test on this motor. But yeah, so to take the motor out is actually very easy. There's this little plastic clip here that holds the motor in place, and you just gently slide it and it comes right off. And now the motor, you just slide the motor back a little bit and it pops right out. Now the way the motor is getting its power, and this is very important for the DC installation or DCC installation, is these two metal tabs if you look here at the frame, you can kind of see that there's actually two separate frames here. So there's this frame here, and there's this frame here that then is molded and comes over like this. So these frames are insulated from each other, and they're picking up power from the wheels. And then also, these little copper tabs are actually touching these two little pins here and bringing power also from the tender. And then that power goes up through these little metal engine mounts, and then these little copper tabs here pick up the power, and that's what powers the motor. So this will need to be insulated, and probably going to put just a tiny little piece of electric tape in there to insulate the motor, and then I'll be soldering wires directly to these tabs, and I might end up cutting these parts off. I might cut this and this, but I'm going to wait till last, to make sure everything's going to work before I do that, because once I cut that, you can't obviously reinstall it unless I have to go and buy parts, which I don't want to do. So that is how I believe I can insulate the motor from the shell. So this decoder here is rated at 1.25 amps peak. So what this means is at any time there should be no more than 1.25 amps being pulled from the decoder by the motor. So to make sure that this decoder will work with this motor, you want to do something called a stall test. So a stall test basically simulates what happens when the motor gets stuck and it stops spinning and it draws the most amperage. So what you'll do is you'll take a standard power pack and you'll have a multimeter, and you'll set it up in a series with the multimeter in between the motor and the power pack. To do this, you want your power pack set to 12 volts. And let it zero out first, okay. And then run it up to 12 volts. Right there. Alright, you got 12 volts and 11.97 volts, so pretty close. Alright, so now you want to make sure you have an amp meter that can handle up to 10 amps. A lot of amp meters only go up to 250 milliamps or 500 milliamps, and that's not going to be enough because you need something that can actually go up to at least 2 or 3 amps. I found that most meters are either rated in the milliamps, or then some will go up to 10 amps. So we'll set that to 10 amps. And to do this, I'm going to hold a little tip there on the brush mount, and then connect this. So this first test will just be to see what it pulls when the motor's running. And it's pulling about 0.15 amps. Alright, so now we'll do it again, but I'm going to hold the armature so it cannot spin. And you can hear it. And it's drawing about 0.63 amps. Okay, you don't want to do that too long because that can damage the motor. So this motor will be perfectly fine with this decoder. I'm going to go ahead and trim the wires I don't need. So I'm just going to get a wire cutter. Alright, I know that seems a little weird, but like I said, this decoder or this locomotive has no lights. But these wires I might save because you can use them for jumper wires for other things. And then, just to make sure to be on the safe side, I'm going to put a little piece of electric tape over this just to make sure that it does not ever possibly connect or short out. A small piece would be perfect. Remember, this has got to fit up inside the tender there. Alright, so that's all taken care of. So those wires we don't have to worry about. So now I'm going to get the decoder put up inside of here. So the decoder will go up in here in the cavity where the coal is located. The coal load. And this is going to sit like this. Okay. Now, the black and the red wire I want to come out this side of the weight, but I want the gray and the orange wire to come out through this little groove right there. Alright, put that up in there. Put this in place, make sure those wires are lined up. Make sure those wires are lined up. And then snap the weight into place. So now the weight is snapped in there, the decoder is up inside, these wires are going through that little notch there, and these wires are sticking out the back. Okay, so these will go to the motor up here in the locomotive, and these will go to these little copper strips which will pick up the power. So let's take a look again at the wiring diagram. So the black wire is supposed to go onto the left side of the locomotive, and the red wire is supposed to go on the right, which it's kind of easy to remember. Red is right. We'll start with an R. So if this is the locomotive and this is the back, this will be facing forward, then that means that the right wire is going to be on this side. So the red will connect here and the black will connect here. Now I want to leave a little bit of slack, and there's room for the wire to coil up a little bit, but I don't want to leave too much slack. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this just a little bit, but not too much, because I still want a little bit of slack to work with in case I make mistakes. Alright, so remove those wires, and then I have a nice pair of wire strippers here that I will use and just very, very gently strip the very end of the wire. I usually find the easiest thing to do is to not fully strip it and then twist as you take that off, and that usually helps get all of your wire threads together so they don't fray. So we got that all twisted up. Alright, so I'm going to just look at it from my direction just so I don't mess things up. It'll be the opposite for the camera. So that's the front. So we have red wire going to the right and black wire going to the left. So that's the right side and that's the left side. Alright, so to do this, I'm going to prop that up there so that the wires are a little bit easier to get to. And now I will need to solder these little wires. Alright, so I have like these little mini arts and crafts clothesline clips, laundry clips. And I think I can just use this to clip the wire in a position so that it touches the copper wire in here and holds it in place just long enough for me to do the solder joint. So we got that. That's the touch. And once again, just put a little bit of flux on this. This just helps clean the solder joint. Make sure that you get a nice, good, clean joint. And then here's where you want to be very, very careful, because you do not want this to melt the plastic. So I've got a little bit of solder on the rosin, and you actually want to hold the actual There we go. Alright, so that flowed really good. So that wire is now soldered. So, let's see how good of a solder joint that is. Yep, that's holding pretty good. And it did melt the plastic ever so slightly, but nothing that'll be seen from the outside. So now, let's get the other one in place. Try to move it forward. I know, unfortunately, the way my camera's set up here, it's kind of hard to see in, but it's kind of the setup I have available to me right now. You do want to make sure that you're working in a well-ventilated area. I do have my windows open, so I'm not breathing in toxic fumes, because some of this, depending on the solder you use, there still is lead solder. So, yep. And there we go. Alright. So I will show you now. So those wires are now soldered onto those little strips. And those strips, of course, connect to the power pickups on the wheels. And one of the things that was important, the reason why I ran the wires up here is there's this little screw hole right here. And that needs to be kept open so that the screw that comes through the bottom through that truck can go in there. So we're now at a point where we should have this all together. And we're pretty much done at this point with this part. I need to run these wires. There's a little notch. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a little notch underneath here. And that little notch is where I'm going to run these wires through. So I'm going to do something you shouldn't do when your decoder has power, just so I can get these to all go through there. Alright, so you can see those are now coming out through there. Put that together. This will go into place. It slides down. Alright, so that's all connected. And now I'm going to put this screw back in to hold everything in place. Remember to do the quarter back and then tighten. Alright, so now these wires will just simply cross like that, and they will probably, there's a little bit of a notch here between where the two sections of the frame avoid touching each other, and I'm going to run the wires up through here because the motor mount is right here. So here's what I consider the difficult part of this installation. What I have to do is figure out how to get power to come off of these two wires into the motor and isolate the motor from the frame. So the power is coming from the sides. So it looks like this actually won't be too difficult. What I'll have to do is just cut this here so that this little strip does not touch the side, and the same for the one underneath. Then what I'll do is I will solder a wire here and a wire here. The plan is to bring the wires up through the bottom like this. So to do this, like I said, I think this actually won't be as bad as I originally thought. I'm going to use a pair of pliers here. And I want to be careful not to break the brush mount, so I'm going to bend that out. I'm going to bend this out as well. And then I'm going to take my wire cutting tool and I'm going to cut this. Alright, so I've cut those little tabs off. So now this should be insulated, but I want to double check because should and is are two different things, and we do not want to burn this decoder up. Alright, so I'm going to take my multimeter here, set it to resistance, touch this into that part of the frame, so that's picking up power. Alright, so there's nothing there. Nothing here. Nothing here. And then the most difficult part will be to see if there's nothing between here and this copper piece. And it appears to be completely insulated. But to be on the safe side, I'm going to put a little piece of electric tape underneath there to make sure it is 100%. So now I've got to bring the wires in, and I don't want there to be a lot of slack, but it does look like there's a little bit of room. So if there is a tiny bit of slack, it can sit underneath the motor just a little bit. And you want a little bit of slack too, so you can move things around if you have to take it apart. So the fun part now is I have to figure out which wire goes where. So this used to be, when it was sitting in the frame, that this tab here picked up from the right side and this bottom tab here picked up from the left side. So I'm going to kind of go with the same thing. So remember, red goes with the orange. So orange wire goes on the right side and black gray wire goes on the left side. Now it really is actually going to the positive and negative end of the motor. But if you do install it backwards, there is a setting where you can change the direction of the decoder to go the opposite. So that way, if it is installed backwards, you don't have to unsolder everything. So what I'm going to do, it's a little bit too much slack, but I don't want there to be too little. So I'm going to cut it right here. Put those wires there. And then I'll strip these, and then we'll go ahead and solder that to the motor. So I really do like this type of wire strippers. I had one of these back in the States. Even for small wires, if you're really careful with it, it will work. Sometimes it cuts the wire a little bit, but like I said, if you're really careful and you adjust, this has an adjustable tightness setting, and I have it set to the loosest. You just want to be very, very gentle. So just twist off the wire ends. That way the wire gets twisted inside as you pull it off. I'll hold it in place using this clip again. And set that there. A little bit of flux. Iron. Remember, you want to get the actual metal hot, not the solder. Like that. Let's see, the brush popped out. Okay, so I just learned a valuable lesson here, that the brush is actually kind of mounted like that, so it will pop out. Alright, so let's do the other side. Once again, I'm going to use my clip. A little bit of flux. Okay, so this time I actually soldered it onto the little copper tab so the brush wouldn't come out. Let's see how good of a... Alright, so that's good. Alright, so now it's time to test to see how well this actually worked. Pressure on there. So you get electrical contact. We're on. Locomotive 3. And it works. So having the brush pop out did not damage it. Alright, so now it's time to put it all back together. So I got the weight in. And like I said, I'm going to have to reprogram it because I do have it in the wires backwards. And it's running. The wheels need to be cleaned obviously, but it is running. Running about as good as it did back when it was in DC. Alright, so I now have it all put back together. And it still gets stuck like it kind of did before, but it does run. And let's see if I can get it to go all the way around. So it's not running very smooth, but it honestly didn't run very smooth back when it was in DC. The wheels need to definitely get clean, but yeah, it works. So that installation, I would say, is a success. So if you ever happen to get one of these starter sets and want to convert it to DCC, you now know how to do it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you like this video or are interested in Japanese trains or trains in general, I invite you to please subscribe to this channel. You can also check out my website at gilshrat.info. Additionally, I'm on Facebook at facebook.com/Gilshrat and Twitter at twitter.com/Gilshrat channel. And once again, thanks for watching.